one. Welcome to Sounding Point Podcast. I'm Joseph Christensen, and with me today is Michael Delfin. He is a two-time classmate of mine at both Peabody Institute and San Francisco Conservatory of Music at different times. And now he's a doctoral candidate at Cincinnati College-Conservatory of Music for, I believe, keyboard and historical performance. Frankly, you've switched around, so it's sometimes hard to keep track. But Michael, it's a honor to have you on the show.
Oh, the pleasure is mine.
Okay, man. Tell me what's been going on. We tried to do this last week, but then you gave me this very sort of apocalyptic. I feel like we're in the middle of an apocalypse because you. Well, tell me what happened last week. Why couldn't you make it to the podcast as scheduled?
Because I was literally running late, but actually, I was running along, and a little dog about the size of my foot decides to run up to me, chomp out of my leg, which meant calling the health department and tracking down the owner and making sure I don't have rabies because my Old Yeller impression isn't very good. And then, after all the phone calls were over, I practiced clavichord and made a cheesecake.
Okay,
And
that's
you were intrigued by that order, so I
I
thought I'd mention it.
yeah. So you were attacked by a dog. Can you take me through that? Where were you running? Why were
Oh
you attacked
gosh.
by a dog? What were you doing to this poor animal?
Oh, uh, I was about, I don't even think I was like a tenth of a mile away. Like I just started a run to go pick up some tea. Because social distancing, you should uh, clog the tea shops.
Ah,
But we were running low, my wife and and I figure, well, it's only a mile and a half away. And yeah, little dog goes chump.
did it draw blood?
Oh yeah, got a lovely mark.
Wow.
I mean, it shouldn't have been a big deal, but it's not exactly polite to punt a dog into the next street over when its owner is right there,
Yeah.
because that's an effective way to keep from getting bit. But it's not
Yeah, we don't
but I'm
endorse.
okay, no rabies.
Good. Oh yeah. Well, I don't know. That's still out. That's still out. The jury's still out on that one, but um,
Well, I got rabid about harpsichord a few years ago, so
okay.
that's
That's
probably why.
was
This
the
is tea,
dog
by the way.
excellent? This is coffee. Um,
Excellent.
now, so the dog was off the leash, I'm assuming. So yeah, dog was sorry. Scrunched out for a moment. Sorry. So the dog was off the leash.
I'll scrunch back in somehow.
Please do.
Uh, the owner just let me see. Never
That's
mind.
it. You did it.
Now that's captured on the internet for the
Yeah.
world to see. Uh, Now that off the leash, the owner didn't grab it, and no big deal. She was very nice about it, and the dog has its shots, and
Okay.
no
Yeah.
issues. And I have all my shots, and I did it back.
Okay. Good. I was gonna ask, is the dog okay? No, but I have that. I'm not very opinionated when it comes to people's pets in general. I'm pretty laissez-faire in most ways. I really do not like it when people let dogs off the leash, though. I've changed on that one. I
Mhm.
because I was actually running a couple years ago in San Francisco, and I saw this dog cross the street right as this car was coming around the corner, and their owner was right
Ooh,
there, and if they were on the leash, they would have been fine. Thank God the driver was had quick reactions and they stopped. But that was, I mean,
sure.
that was a dead dog in most other circumstances. And I was like, what? So what is the net benefit of keeping the dog off the leash, so it feels better. It's really so the owner feels better, so they don't feel like they're, you know, subjugating their dog or something. But if you want to keep your
Oh,
dog
sure.
alive, yeah, maybe if you're way out in the middle of the country, it doesn't matter as much. But
Yeah, and that's sort of where I grew up. Didn't have to, um, um, didn't really, never had to tie up our Rottweiler mixes, but they were very well trained, and that's key. And if,
mm-mm-mm.
of course, we go camping and always on a leash.
Right, exactly. So anyway, definitely the first time talking about that on this podcast. um, feel
Definitely the first time.
yeah. um, but going into, I guess, what we've been going through. So I've been, um, I've been. This is the since Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So this is the fifth straight day of power outages in Livermore,
Oh man.
which means I don't have internet, which means, by the way, since I teach online, right? So that's my one form of income against all this corona disruption, right? I'm not seeing people in person, so I'm only teaching online.
Mm.
And then when they shut the power off, they usually shut it off around 2 and it goes through the afternoon. Means my teaching is shot.
Oh,
Thank God I have Christy, my girlfriend, and I go to her house, and she is in Tracy, and that is unaffected. And in fact, most of my students live in Livermore and they're unaffected. So it's not that I'm wishing my misfortune to spread across the land to others, but it's unbelievable how they're taking this single neighborhood. And I know it's not just me. I know it's rotating neighborhoods across the state, but it's unbelievable how they just pick specific neighborhoods to be the, like, whatever you want to call it, the hobby horse, the whipping boy of this power outage, and then others are totally fine. There's no disruption to 90% of the state, and it's nuts.
mm.
It sucks being in this thing. Anyway, so that's my complaint. I feel bad about that.
And I thought and I thought Fresno was the armpit of California. No, I'm
It
kidding.
still is.
It's still
Still
home.
is.
Maybe Bakersfield. Oh, Chowchilla. There we go.
Chowchilla. Mmm. Very
Or
nice.
Manteca. What would
Yes.
you name your city? The Spanish word for lard.
Oh,
I never
really?
could understand.
That shows you how much I know about
Or
Spanish.
my favorite, just south of you is Los Baños.
Los
And man,
Baños.
you drive through that place in the summer, and oh, it smells like it.
Yeah.
The cows.
Mm-hmm. We're um, we are having a heat wave right now, so that idea does not
I
appeal
heard
to
about
me
that.
ever, but particularly right now. How are you doing? What's going on over there? Sorry, I've been taking up your podcast complaining about my own life.
Oh, good. Um, well, you mentioned I'm at CCM. We're gearing up to start for the semester, and fun times that is.
Good. And how is that different from usual now with the whole pandemic?
Well, God be praised, we can still um, get access to the school, and some people are opting for in-person lessons. Other people are saying, "Ain't no way,
Mm-hmm.
Jose." And oh, you are Jose too. Now that I think
Yeah,
about it.
that's true.
Um, well, I'll be able to take harpsichord lessons. Ensembles are going to be interesting because there are going to be some online components. There are going to be some in-person, very spaced out, assuming people are willing to go ahead and do that. My assistantship is Blankborough, and our supervisor has said, I will never require you to come in person because she's a little more, oh, I hate to use the word enlightened, but she's at least not, she's not blowing off all precautions.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, that's nice that you'll get to be on campus. I think that's relatively uncommon. I don't know about every school, but certainly
Yeah,
my students heading off to school this year, there's nothing in person for many colleges in California.
sure. Well, the good thing too is that um, for CCM and for UC in general, anything that can be completely online has been moved to online. Like the entire, uh, let's say, composition, musicology, and theory
Right.
departments are all online.
I see. So it's a little hybrid of both.
Yeah, and then anything with voice, like it's not just 6 feet distance; it's whatever 10, 12 feet distance, and of course that means a bunch of teachers are saying we're not showing up.
Yeah, that's well. It's good to have that option. Good that your organization's flexible. So, what was I gonna say? Oh,
Yeah,
I wanted to. I think it'd be good to step back and just give people a little insight into you and what you're doing. So, like, as long as I've known you, you've been a pianist, piano player.
nerd.
That too, that too. But you've been tickling the ivories for as long as I've known you, and that has recently somewhat changed, right? So I just wanted to ask you kind of your journey from piano to historical performance. Could you describe that a little bit? Because I mean, to be honest, I don't even know who listens to this podcast. I don't know. I don't know the target demographic yet, so I think that the listenership of this podcast ranges from highly specialized musicians to maybe non-specialist or musician, maybe just people interested in music. So taking stepping back and explaining for people who maybe aren't as engaged in the world of music, how would you describe your
Sure.
kind of journey from classical piano major to where you are now?
Well, short A is to borrow C.S. Lewis, a reluctant convert
Very
initially.
nice.
But I'd say I have to give a little bit of background. Um, when I was a kid, not a kid in his late 20s, um, I, uh, I was very much drawn to the music world in general, not necessarily piano. And uh, this is before YouTube, before IMSLP. So, what do we have? As many CDs as we can persuade the librarians and our parents to take us home, or to let us take home. And for me, it meant, growing up in a rural area, every time I had access to uh, music or recordings, sheet music or recordings, just devouring it. And in some of that music, which ranged from Renaissance to music from the late 1990s, as
Whoa.
it was back then, and early 2000s. Uh, and don't get me started on the fact that incoming freshmen were born after 2000s. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they're so young. I'm so old. Um, Going through all of this music, I'd be listening to, let's say, Bach played on flute and harpsichord, or Baroque ensembles, and they think, well, A, why are they flat? That is so weird. Because they try to play along on a keyboard at 440 and go, wait a second. Um, and that's when I figured out the one of the ways we figured out I had perfect pitch, but that's another story.
That's cool.
Um, I heard a lot of Baroque music, and I remember learning Bach on the piano, preludes and fugues and dances and Italian concerto and whatnot. I remember thinking, okay, well, these people on the recordings are playing their eighth notes detached and their 16th notes what sound legato. I want to try that on the piano. And I didn't really care beyond that. It's like, I don't want to read figure bass. That looks hard. And oh gosh, remember when we were at Peabody, end of our freshman year, we tried jamming with
Yeah.
Renee,
Uh-huh.
Renee Delgado, and Brian Kay, and there's a picture of me at the harpsichord. I'm like, this thing is so cool, but I don't ever want to learn this god awful piece of junk. Um, that was probably the censor was thinking
Yeah, yeah,
of
yeah.
what I was thinking. And then,
Think on.
taking, yeah, oh, come on. Taking Adam Pearl's keyboard literature, thinking, oh, this music is actually really cool, but I don't really want to learn it, but I know it's really cool, so whatever. And then we get to San Francisco, and I still owe Sarah Douglas, nee Blaley,
Shout
an
out to
enormous
Sarah.
debt of gratitude. Yes, um, she's doing incredible work in Canada and the Netherlands, or like I forget where exactly, but um, she really twisted my arm and said, "You should, you should try the harpsichord. You should try the forte piano. You should read the CPE treatise that I gave you for your birthday or whatever it was." I actually am reading it right now. And it's funny because she left me some notes in it, um, underlining certain areas or writing LOL or whatever it might be on CPE's more snarky comments. And for the record, this is Carl Philipp Emanuel's Bach, essay on the true art of playing the keyboard instruments. Well, he was the son of JS, so he has some
Some
authority
clout.
in that area.
Yes.
Yes, and he even said that he sometimes uses his father's examples, which don't do terribly much harm on students. So, or something like that. I should pull it up sometime. So, I remember her telling me because she could get into certain rooms at SFCM where you could try a harpsichord or uh, forte piano or whatnot, and she says, "This stuff, this stuff suits you." And I said, "I'll get out of here. Um, I don't have time for this. I'm going for a doctoral program in piano." But secretly, I'm thinking, maybe in another lifetime. And
Mm.
then I had taken a continual class with James, who's a wonderful teacher at San Francisco. And I thought, well, okay, there's some aspect of rudimentary keyboard harmony that I could probably try someday. I get to see some, which for a long time had a dearth of historical performance, and I think, oh my goodness, I had it so lucky at Peabody and San Francisco, and I really could have delved into this. And you often don't know how much you have to be grateful for until it's not there anymore.
True.
So it's okay. I started taking harpsichord lessons and figured bass class and Baroque performance class with my dear teacher and mentor, Dr. Michael Unger, realizing, holy expletives galore, this music is so incredible, and historical performance isn't just a bunch of stodgy old men and women telling us how to play according to rules and whatnot. Um, listening to historical ensembles, you can just sense the life pouring out of their performances. We were lucky at San Francisco and Peabody to watch the Peabody Renaissance
Mm-hmm.
Ensemble or the SFCM Baroque Orchestra, and these are students, and it still sounds great.
Yep.
And um, I'd say a month after my first harpsichord lesson, I had harpsichord you playing the music of Lou Harrison, um, which is a project that got handed off to me from the percussion department via the interim dean of CCM, who was a musicologist and harpsichordist, and then via my harpsichord teacher, because none of them had time for the project. And I look at this piece and I go, okay, I like new music. And listening to the recording, I'm thinking, oh, Michael, you didn't know what you were doing. But at the time, and I mean, I'm still not sure I do, but at the time, I go through the performance, and I'm really enjoying this. February of 2017, so the Lou Harrison Centennial, and some friends of mine in the composition department and piano department came up to me and they said, "Oh, there was some really neat, um, really neat colors coming out of the instrument, and you played really well. This is really cool stuff." And I thought, "Oh, okay, maybe I have a little bit of a knack for this." And then in the following couple of months, major successes of getting into the American Bach Soloists Academy, which was mind blowing. Such a powerful immersion. Getting into the University of Michigan's Early Keyboard Institute and getting to take lessons on harpsichord and forte piano, and teachers telling me, you have a knack for this, you really should pursue this. And then Sarah telling me, "I told you so," very, very kindly, of course. And winning the Catacoustic Consort's early music grant, which paid the tuition for ABS Academy, which is now free. So
Hmm.
it's a fantastic program. And so gaining a lot of momentum here, and um, what is his name? Um, Robert Mealy from Juilliard, he runs the program, the historical performance program. He invited me to apply, and I actually ended up getting into Juilliard for a harpsichord masters,
Wow.
but I had to turn them down. The cost of living was just a bit too much. So instead, um, I ended up staying for an artist diploma, which eventually turned into a doctorate. And the momentum I've been very fortunate to experience has led to lectures for early music in America, which you saw, complete with a table shattering in the middle. uh, Historical Keyboard Society of North America, playing for them, winning a scholarship for them, or with through them, wrong preposition, and teaching figured bass here for a semester, which was a wonderful experience. Um, and getting to really, really work with CCM who want to do historical performance, maybe not are not sure where to begin, and among students and then among faculty, those who realize that okay, there are people here who can actually play figured bass, who are decent collaborators. I have a fantastic conducting teacher here in the choral department. His name is Lincoln Brett Cornish Scott,
Hmm.
Dr. Scott, uh, and we've done some um, collaboration of him conducting from the harpsichord, and that's probably what I'm doing this semester to help fulfill my choral conducting cognate ensemble requirement.
All right. Have you
Yeah,
conducted
good
from the
times.
keyboard before?
I did, in fact, a year ago. My for my piano DMA for that harpsichord cognate recital, I conducted a Corelli concerto from the keyboard, and
Oh.
that was one of the defining moments, or Delfine being, I'm sorry, defining moments for me, because that piece of music, it's in four movements, and the last movement has a coda after this hybrid gavat jig thing. It has this coda which sends the entire ensemble, which is two violin parts, viola, continuo, and all of that in the grosso section of the orchestra, but there's a lot of doubling going on. Um, it's sending that entire ensemble racing towards the finish line, and as the ensembles, everybody's sawing their instruments in half on with their bows, and the momentum picks up. There's this overwhelming crescendo, and everybody just goes all out towards the finish line. And one of these moments, I thought, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. which is interesting because almost 20 years earlier. No, actually, um, yeah, about 20 years earlier, thought I thought to myself, music is what I want to do the rest of my life. The end of my 20s, historical performance. It's the energy there is so relentless and compelling, and it's a loop. The more you do, the more excited you get, and the more excited you get about it, the more you do. And
Mm.
people are interested in this because 9 times out of 10, you talk to some Joe Schmo on the street, and they'll tell you, I've never heard a harpsichord." And you get to show them what it sounds like, and they say, "Oh, that's so cool! It's this quote ancient sounding instrument." And there's some real connection there. People are interested, and you want to communicate, and that's what it really boils down to. You're communicating music in what we what's our best guess of an older style of playing.
That is,
It's pretty
yeah,
great.
yeah, that's a really nice way of expressing what historical performance means to you. And I think like um, I need to tell you a story that might hurt your heart a little bit, but because it also upsets me looking back on it. Um, I won't say which teacher, but one of my early teachers, one of my early teachers had, like, the KUSC or whatever they had at that time, the classical music radio station on in between lessons or something, and it was like some Corelli or some whatever Tartini, some kind of concerto grosso, and it was historical performance, no vibrato and anything. And this is like this,
Mm-hmm.
golden era kind of violin person, and they were just listening, and they're like, "Are they trying to sound bad?" They're like, "They're not vibrating, they're not sustaining, they're not doing this, they're not doing this," and that tirade just stuck in my mind for the longest time. Are they trying to sound? And I think I was a snob for a long time. I think I was more sort of indoctrinated into this more, I don't even know what to say, traditional 20th century way of thinking of musical sound, and it's really only been in the last maybe 4 or 5 years that I've kind of come around to listening to historical performance and been like, "Oh, wait a second, this isn't like stuffy, you know. This is
Mm-hmm.
actually, in many ways, it's more free than the traditions that we've developed since then in the 20th century."
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Fabio Biondi that I was listening to. It was one of those European um, historically informed projects playing the Four Seasons.
Those Europeans.
It was one of those, and it was just the tempi they took in the Four Seasons, and the sound effects and the choices they made artistically were so wild and daring, like the
Mm-hmm.
sul ponticello and the weird like bow vibrato and just like the odd ornaments, and listening to it, it was like, whoa, this is very creative. This is not like I'm going back
Mm-hmm.
into the ancient tomes and figuring out what they told us to do back then. It's actually quite the opposite. It's very creative.
Yeah.
Um, so how would you describe historically informed performance as it stands today? Like, what what is it? What is meant by what is meant by historically informed performance, and what happened in between, or and
Mm.
what is it opposed to?
Can I get back to you in about 5 years after writing a book on the subject? Gosh. Hmm. I think a good way to approach this is actually to take apart what this teacher of yours said and thought about it. Because in the 1900s, there was an early music revival courtesy of figures like Arnold Dolmetsch, who was actually turn of the century or 1800s into 1900s, who decided, okay, we should probably preserve some of these instruments and see what we can do with them. Others followed, whose names are legend, for they are many, and they are legendary now. And yeah, the puns
sh-
have only
sh-
gotten worse.
Shout out to the Christians who caught that reference, but go on.
or or those who like Will Smith. But
Okay,
anyhow,
that too.
um, if you listen to early recordings in the 1900s of people like Nadia Boulanger, who went after Monteverdi and other composers of the early Baroque, they're playing music that has been carefully preserved, and they're using the understandings of late 19th century performance practice, which is very, I hate to use the word romantic in nature, but you listen to, let's say, Rachmaninoff and Chrysler play the Grieg Sonata, Third Grieg Sonata. That's a pretty good indicator of what was considered standard at the time, although those two are legends
Oh, incredible.
for their performances. Now, a lot of figures in the early 20th century believed that, okay, well, we should probably try to understand what the composers themselves and those who knew them had to say about the music. And they realized, oh, we actually have to really strip back or strip down on how much vibrato we're using, because it's just an expressive ornament. Though even that is up for debate. Um, there's some heated discussions about Leopold Mozart and Gimignani, other people who wrote on how to play the violin in the 18th century. So let's pair mixing expressions. Let's pare down on what I think would be the natural way to play according to how we were taught. And very often you get a lot of recordings that seem kind of stale and stuffy. Now, coming out of that, well, we have to realize that this is the music in Europe. This is music in Europe. They were ahead of the US in so many different ways, musically and potentially otherwise, but that's for another discussion. It's music of European culture, and the fire has been ahead in European performance of this music for some time now. So it can really influence who is listening and when and to what and who is performing and how it was recorded and on what instruments and of the century of this music. And unfortunately, so many people have the misconception of early music and historical performance, and that's just trying to fit us all in a square box and everything. But really, it's so much more freeing, because you realize you have one rule that guides all of the treatises and the composers and performers um, of music before 1800. That is simply good taste. No matter what performers and composers did and specified in their music, they would always go back to good taste. And even C.P.E. Bach, writing this massive didactic treatise on how to play keyboard instruments, in which he highly favors the clavichord, he says that you need to look good performers. You need to go to concerts. You need to have a good teacher. You have to work with good singers. You actually have to be in the music, and the music has to be alive and surrounding you. And that is, all of this is a facet in historical performance that we don't readily see, because people who hold to a romantic, quote, tradition of playing will find themselves unfortunately threatened because, well, frankly, it forces us to expand our way of thinking and hearing and playing. It's kind of sad because there's much we can learn from a style of playing that we're not used to. We don't have to take all of it, but I'll give you two examples. Ian Swenson, who teaches at San Francisco, will try his hand at historical performance, and I mean it's obvious he learns from it, and he's an amazing musician on modern instruments. One doesn't win Naumburg twice for no reason. And then another example would be 2019 January, Richard Agar came to Cincinnati Symphony and conducted Bach Brandenburg 5, Four Seasons, and I believe there was a Bach orchestral suite on the program. And everybody was playing at the 440 on their modern instruments, but there were this element of historical practice just made everything go to the next level of fire and commitment in the playing. And my harpsichord teacher and I were talking about it afterward, and his remark to me was, there were things he was doing that just shouldn't have worked, but they did. It's timing and pitch bending even. It's incredible. So if modern players can go from one weekend of playing music, a very robust orchestral sound under one conductor, and it's the way we may understand it, to playing with elements of a performance practice it's very, very different, anybody can do it.
Mm-hmm. I find
and why
that
not? The music's so good.
yeah, yeah, and it's funny how much of the repertoire, it, since this pandemic, there has been so much solo Bach. Like
Sure.
there's a centrality to the Baroque repertoire even today, um, that I think there's nothing to be lost by learning as much as we can about this
Mm-hmm.
performance practice. Um, what you mentioned about the idea of taste, it's kind of interesting. I think
Mm-hmm.
I have two thoughts about that. I'm just gonna say them in no particular order, see what you think about them. One is that I think the closest I ever got to a feeling of historically informed performance, or feeling like, oh, I'm gaining a sense for um, the feeling, like the oral tradition of this particular style of music. I in actually when we were at school together, or maybe a couple years before. I think I started this in undergrad, and it went a little through.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I went a little through my master's that I was obsessed with this, but I was reading biographies of people like Arthur Schnabel and Gregor Piatigorsky, kind of these romantic era great people, and they were just talking about kind of the tradition of chamber music, um, and they would just recount these famous stories of these parties with Rachmaninoff and
Yeah.
all these fabulous instrumentalists gathered together and playing together in living rooms, and how that was the chamber music culture, like the salon culture was like this very convivial atmosphere, and
Mm-hmm.
and it's very much attached to this idea of a leader, like how um, leader, I mean, piano repertoire, a great deal of 19th century piano repertoire is also wrapped up in the salon culture, but more
Oh,
specifically,
sure.
German leader have this amazing intimacy to them. It is a
Mm-hmm.
form of music intended for a small group of dear friends, right? And
Oh,
just
sure.
I the way I started, I would listen to more and more Lieder and Schumann and Schubert in particular, and I started to realize that there's like this specific culture to the sound that you and I would hear Leon Fleischer talk about this. Someone was playing. I mean, we as of the recording of this podcast, the great maestro Leon Fleischer has passed away a few weeks ago, and he's someone who's had a great impact on both of us. So maybe we can
Oh, sure.
talk about him a little bit later. But I remember seeing master classes of him where someone was playing like Carnival or some Schumann piece, and he would talk at length about the leader. And he's like, have you listened to this? Have you listened to this? And he's like, you won't be able to play Schumann faithfully until you understand like his mode of expression, like the way he's trying to express himself um, through his leader. And anyway, so why am I talking about this? I almost felt like after immersing myself in this culture for over the course of a few years, that I was like, oh, now when I play this music, I have almost a feeling of this. I mean, I don't know. I could play some of this repertoire or whatever for
Mhm.
someone back then. I have no idea how they would feel about it, but I feel a connection to it. I feel like I'm beginning to gain context for it, and that to me
I
that's
think you're absolutely right.
yeah.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So so I think that like that there's a beautiful aspect to that that's very delicate. It's very fragile because the further we go on in time is the further we get away from the source of a lot of that material. So
Mhm.
it takes a lot of sensitivity on the performance part today and a lot of historical interest to go back to these very refined forms of self-expression that have less
Mhm.
context as we go forward. So now, so that's the great thing for taste is like once you inhabit that world for a while of refining your taste for a particular kind of music, it has a spirit to it. You're entering into its spirit in a special way that you wouldn't get by just picking up the sheet music and playing through it and being like, oh, here it is, bye. Just kind of.
Mhm.
But my counterpoint, sorry, I'll let you talk in a second. My counterpoint is probably one of the most done to death topics. You probably have slight levels of cringe at hearing about this, but like Sting playing the theorbo, right? And or
Oh
or
my.
or it might not have been a theorbo, it might have been a lute. Um, oh, do you not know about this?
No, I'll have to check this out.
Yeah, so Sting, the singer of the Police, singing Dowland. So that's
I'm
one of
gonna
the
look this up later.
okay, well, it's one of the more famous examples of historically informed or uninformed performance that's out there. And I think for me there's almost unfortunately the temptation or the danger of historically informed performance, maybe you can tell me I'm wrong, is almost this hierarchy of taste where you have this small number of people who have obviously studied and dedicated their lives, which is beautiful, but also there's a lot of people in that world who would look at something like what did with the lute and playing Dowland, obviously with very little context as to how this is historically performed. And they'd look at that and be kind of dismissive and say, "Oh, that's cool. That's a pop star." But this, we are the tastemakers. We get to say what is valid in this world. And there is a danger of restrictiveness to that, right? And I don't know what I'm. I guess as a the further I get on away from music school, I'm starting to see um, fewer and fewer separations between different kinds of music, different kinds of musicians. It's like once we're out here in the
Yeah.
world, we're all just trying to be musicians. We're all playing what we want and what sounds good to us at the end of the day. So some of that sort of snobbishness, that restrictiveness, kind of strikes me the wrong way. What do you think about all that?
That'll be another 5 years,
Okay,
but no.
okay, yeah, yeah.
You know, your thought about a sting and the lutes reminded me of um, Yanni incorporating summer from the Four Seasons, and well, he's making millions, and we are not. So taste changes with every generation. Um, this music is greater than any interpretation, frankly. I think that's why Baroque music is the greatest music. It's survived for hundreds of years and it still has enormous appeal because of its, I don't want to say the word purity per se, but certainly clarity, transparency, and certain aspects of the music then will guide the performance of it. If you, on the piano, if you were to pedal your way through an entire Bach piece and make it obvious that you're, you know, doing that, somebody's probably going to say, what is this, Bach or Chopin, or Debussy or something? But I was in a discussion with some friends about this earlier, and transparency probably is going to need transparency in performance. So that's one thought, that the music will demand a certain honesty about actually asking yourself over and over again, what is this that I'm playing? How can I bring out what I see in it? And granted, that's very, very subjective, but you hit on an extraordinarily important point in the previous point you made, that you feel, this sounds so snobbish, but you feel informed when you get informed. I don't even like the word informed. It makes it sound like I have information that you do not. But that information is public domain, and you know, go read the book for yourself. Um, One of my teachers once said in a studio class that an uninformed performance is an ignorant performance, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think he was absolutely right. Getting into the context and the culture, the literature, the drama, the aesthetics, the philosophy, the religion, the scandal, even the politics, the wars going on, the, I don't know, the spice trade, the tea and coffee, whatever, the textiles that went into the fabric people were using, or the the technology and building, all of these different things that go into the context of the music itself is the responsibility of every musician, not just people who want to be historically informed. I mean, I think it really should be historically responsible.
Hmm.
Historically responsible performance. We should market that and get a quarter every time someone says it. But really, it's the responsibility of every musician to go do some homework, find out something about the piece you are playing. One of my my teacher actually, uh, for recitals, she used to require her students to find out some information about the composer, about the piece, maybe communicate something we'd like, and you know, you could read it on a little 3x5 to the audience, but she wanted to produce musicians, not just pianimals, as Paul Hirsch would call them.
Shout out to Paul Hirsch.
Yes, yes. Who encourages us still to this day to say reasonably cogent things.
Yes, reasonably cogent, which is one of the
And you know,
highest, it's one of the highest compliments I've ever heard anyone in class.
oh gosh, good times. And you know, he's somebody who could tell us stories about when he was a violist and pianist in his 20s and 30s, and talking to people who were born in the 1800s, and who could tell stories about, you know, going back further and further. Historical performance in the 19th century really teaches us that we aren't that far removed
Right.
from certain composers. You mentioned Leon Fleischer. Um, they used to do these Beethoven marathons at Peabody and do all 32 sonatas in one day in his studio. And one of an enormous point of pride among um, his students is that they were in a direct line from Beethoven, Czerny, Liszt, Leschetizky, Schnabel, Fleischer. Such lines exist throughout um, all of music, really. Um, Schnabel editions and recordings, and even though he later sort of disowned his own edition, he is a great example of what performance practices were like late 19th century. Florence May and Fanny Davies, both British pianists, Ilona Schutz, Italka Freund, Carl Friedberg, who was um, teacher of one of my teachers, they all worked with Brahms.
Hmm.
We have recordings of Carl Friedberg's lessons or teaching David Hungerford, I believe his name was, at Juilliard, and we have him saying on record, "Oh yeah, Brahms played all his music for me, all his piano music. He played it for me in private." And uh, even Schutz saying on recording, "Oh, Brahms played Opus 118 and 119 for me before he published it.
Mm.
He just he brought me into a room down and played for me, and later he played it for me again." And stories like that by people who made recordings of Brahms and Schumann, that's a huge window into the past. And that goes along with the culture. We also have anecdote, and it's you have to take it with some grains of salt, but these are bits of information that are readily available to us, and the more we can take advantage of it, I personally find that the more rewarding our music making can be, and the more we actually might learn. You hear the timing of people in the early 1900s in their recordings, and it just blows your mind how much liberty they take and how exciting their performances are. It doesn't have to be note perfect.
Hmm.
Pianists talk about Cortot's recordings, which are so sublimely beautiful, and yet you wouldn't dare play like that in a competition.
Yeah.
It's a strange double standard.
Yeah, I love Alfred Cortot. Phenomenal. Um, I think that's a really good response. I think historically responsible performance is a funny way of saying it because regardless of how far to the historical side you go, or if you lean more romantic, you don't want to avoid the historical side out of ignorance, just as you wouldn't want to ignore the traditions that sprung up in the 20th century just because these are closer to us in time. More people are familiar with
Mm-hmm.
this, but um,
And to be clear, there doesn't have to be a dichotomy between what would be historically informed and what would be, we keep using the word romantically informed. Um, there's the two are not enemies by any stretch.
well,
They one can inform the other, and it leads to a very highly oxygenated performance, and
and I mean it's
for lack of a better expression.
to some degree it's the same unbroken tradition. However, years removed, and um, yeah, so and there isn't that separation in reality. It's just interesting how I suppose there was almost a since it's almost a result of it being an unbroken tradition that you didn't have this
Mm-hmm.
sense maybe in the 20th century that we were doing anything like wrong or against what Bach or any of these people would have said. I think it probably has also to do with the availability of texts and the research that went into it.
Oh yeah.
um,
Mm,
I'll never forget
very good point.
my first my first coaching with Seth Knopp at Peabody Institute.
Yes.
I go in with I think it was a piano quintet. We were playing Schumann piano quintet, and he asked us to bring our Baron Reiter score to the first rehearsal. We had ordered it, or we were supposed to have ordered it, but we were freshmen and we had no idea what we were doing. And we show it to the first rehearsal with a Fischer or some Schirmer edition in the library,
Ooh.
and he's like, "So where's the Barenreiter edition?" And he's like, "Oh, we're like, oh, sorry, we ordered it. We probably ordered it like the hour before, but we're like, oh, it's on its way. We ordered it." And he's like, "Okay, the five of you come back when you have your Barenreiter." And that was our entire first coaching with him. And it was so funny.
Yeah,
Like
that's
I'd
it's
never
horrible.
encountered anything like that before. I was like, wow, what a jerk. But I've come to since realize now, since I've been teaching more and students bring these bizarre additions, I'm like, where did you get that bowing or that fingering? And there's so much more work just telling the student, wait, don't do that, but this fingering and whatever it is that
As Gabriel Mesa would say, "You're doing it wrong."
yeah, exactly. So it's almost like a little course correction or
Mm,
something that had to happen given the long history of Western music, and how do we advance in the
mm.
future while reinvigorating or re-entering our performance of old music without just sort of slavishly adhering to these traditions that we don't understand where they came from. So
Yeah. And oh, you said something really great earlier, and I have to backtrack to remember it. Um, before Schumann, I'm sorry, it's
it's okay.
you're talking about um, performance practice late 19th century. Schnabel, I can't remember. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Um,
Oh well, this is actually relevant. Looking at old editions can be somewhat enlightening because you actually do get to understand how music was played a very long time ago. We owe the text movement a debt of gratitude for providing us with at least completely unadulterated, preserved reprints of scores that otherwise people may not care so much about. Unfortunately, an text performance is really a textbook performance. If now I remember what I was going to say. Instead of saying, um, we have to do exactly what Beethoven wrote. We have to do exactly what Bach wrote. Do exactly what Chopin wrote. But then that asks the question: in which manuscript? Instead of saying we must do what the composer wrote all the time, that's that's where we start. It's again what Paul Hirsch used to tell us: play what's clearly printed on the page. That's where we start. In our performances, we don't want to play just what the composer wrote. We want to play what the composer was communicating. They're not the same sometimes. That this is also a matter of taste, but putting our character on the line, and or not our character but our musical personality and our integrity, and seeing how much we have to change to do what the composer specifically said, but how do we communicate that extremely clearly? Can a sforzando in a Beethoven sonata really listen? Are we too sterilized in our 21st century listening because of absolutely immaculate recording? Or when we go to a performance, is because it's note perfect, does it still pack a wallop the same way it would have in the late 18th, early 19th centuries? And there's a Baroque flautist, Bartold Kuiken, who was one of the pioneers in the early music movement. He wrote this fantastic book called "The Notation Is Not the Music," and there's a wonderful Japanese philosopher's saying in the very beginning of the book, and I wish I had it in front of me, but he says essentially, drink from the same spring as the master. That's really what we're going for. We want to try to reach for the same echelon of human communication that the composer was going after. And this is why understanding context, committing to communicate the musical score as the starting place, that's where this really comes from. So in the end, the lessons we're taught in our modern conservatory training and the lessons that historical performance teaches us are really one same. They just might be a different way of looking at the same score.
Yeah, I love that, and it's worth remembering too. Funnily enough, you're talking about the legendary like Brahms recordings of these great pianists around the turn of the century when they're playing Brahms, they knew Brahms, all of this stuff. They're not playing off of urtext. They're playing off of whatever weird additions they had back then, and yet they had direct, influence from the composer. So who's closer? Someone today who's following the precise markings that are well researched and indexed, or someone who was probably working from by our standards today, an extremely messy score, and
Mm-hmm.
is yet able to produce this incredibly exciting performance that gets at the spirit of the composer because it's an oral tradition. Music is an oral tradition at the end of the day.
Mm.
I thought,
It's
I,
very true.
I think, I haven't necessarily articulated it this way before, but I think I like the idea of an urtext as limiting variables because as you've said, if you use an urtext as purely like the textbook, and I'm not going to depart from it in any way. I'm just going to try to do exactly what's on the page. There is a definite risk of sterility. Indeed, that's a major problem. However, um, you know, in using later editions, all you're doing is you're taking that urtext and then you're also, adding these slurs and these weird other markings that someone else wrote. And there's context for those too, especially if it's a great editor. There's context for those too, but that's an equal part of the performance practice, on top of the urtext. So you're complicating
Yeah.
matters by adding context. So I think that's the great benefit of the urtext. You're just kind of removing those extra layers of interpretation, which might be helpful, and it might have been written there by Schnabel or by Courteau, and it could be like a great performer giving you his insight. But
Mhm.
short of that, it's the urtext is giving you clarity and lack of variables.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting you mentioned Schnabel again, because I was just thinking of Schirmer's edition of Beethoven's sonatas, which in their old catalog was like the first two books in their catalog. um, Hans von Bülow, pardon my German, uh, he
It's
he
pretty good.
edited it.
It's Hans von
He
Bülow.
oh, oh, I'm going to take diction this semester, so that'll fix that. Um, he produced this, by our standards, terrible edition of the Beethoven sonatas, but at the same time, he studied with Liszt. So he's even further back in time than Schnabel. And I, both both editions are extremely highly edited, but they give us information about how things were played. And Boulez was even even closer to Beethoven than Schnabel. I would I would never play from that edition, to learn a piece from, but to want some information might not be such a bad idea.
Yeah, that's cool.
There were some great performers who produced editions. Of sonatas, for instance, there's Schenker's edition, which at least tried to E or text, there's still some things that raise eyebrows. There's some things about Schenker that raises eyebrows, but there's some scandal in the theory world about that right now. Again, for if you ever interview my wife, maybe she can tell you a thing or two about that. Um, but then there are people like Friedberg who wanted to make things as plain as possible and do away with all this other stuff. And then, of course, in performance, then comes the oral tradition.
Yes. Interesting. That's cool. That's really interesting. I mean, I sometimes wonder because my lineage, my violinistic forefathers include Paganini. So, which is rare because my teacher Nina Bodnar studied with Zeno Francescati, studied with his father, who studied with Camillo Savori, who was the only accredited pupil of Paganini. So that's
Interesting.
that's a cool line. And Francescati made a lot of additions, which are actually kind of notorious among violinists, because I mean I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
it's
I've
kind of
heard.
it's assumed that Francescati just had a bizarre hands. Like he just had a bizarre technique. So what worked for him is not working for 90% of violinists. But that it's interesting for that reason too.
Well,
You
we know
wonder how
that
much of that was passed on.
yeah, we do know that Paganini had a strange
Yeah,
left hand.
yeah,
He had
and I
like
mean,
acromegaly or something.
yeah, Marfan syndrome, I believe it's called. Um,
Okay,
and
I don't know the
and
name.
yeah, yeah. But Francescati had big hands too, so you never know. You never
You have
know.
some fairly large hands yourself.
I do, I do. You know, I'm trying to work up some Paganini right now, but um, I just a couple more topics I wanted to cover with you. So one was just I read your paper about tempo and Brahms, which touches on a lot of the topics we've been talking about. I wanted to get your take on this. So are you aware of Wim Winters?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that. I am.
Can I ask your opinion on the double beat theory?
You could, but you'll have to censor the rest of the podcast.
Okay, good. I mean, it's
Oh
so funny. I
gosh.
I I uh, follow. Do you know the YouTube channel Bach Scholar?
Oh, probably not. I mean, you should send it to me. I'd
Oh
probably
yeah, I'll
find it
send it to
interesting.
you. Because I just kind of independently I follow this channel. I watch some of its videos. Kind of interesting. And then he's been posting all of these things about historical tempo recently. And it's like, you know what? I,
Oh
I,
yeah.
I should talk. I should talk with Michael about this. So, um, I take it this is a matter of some debate in the hip community.
Well, I've been following this phenomenon for a little bit, and the Reader's Digest version is that anybody who's going to call his page authentic sound or his channel authentic sound and censor all disagreements
Yeah.
on YouTube and elsewhere probably means there's some kind of a complex going on of not willing to admit when you're wrong. But it's interesting. The one time I actually decided to listen to maybe a little bit about what this guy's talking about. I believe there is a discussion of Beethoven's Hammerklavier Sonata in which his timing of it ends up being like, geez, 65 minutes, probably longer. Most pianists will pull it off with repeats in about 45 to 50. Um, I, I'm not as, that's one sonata I sadly have not learned, but um, I don't feel so bad because it's extremely difficult. But anyway, there's an account of Liszt performing the piece, and this is where we do have to use salt going over, going through period quote evidence. It apparently took him about an hour to play it.
Hmm.
The thing is, we go to recordings of Brahms, timings that are documented during premieres. A critic might be taking notes and say, okay, well, the performance of this symphony took this long. And so you think that, okay, these performances are happening about the same time, but their tempos are radically different. So how reliable are the critics, first of all? Um, the critics then are, and now are probably listening to different things. We don't know. It's
Right.
music journalism is unfortunately not um, my strong suit. But the double beat theory was debunked a long time ago. Um, William S. Newman wrote a wonderful book called Beethoven on Beethoven, in which he goes into the performance practices of Beethoven's time based on Beethoven's scores, the lessons he taught, the early biographies that, I mean, some of it has to be sifted through. Um, but still, he does make reference to the double beat theory and also makes reference to its complete um, trashing by reliable music scholars. So it's really just a blip on the radar that unfortunately has gotten more attention than it deserves.
So my
And the
my
thing is,
understanding,
sorry, go ahead.
oh, I mean, just to give some context, my understanding of it is that because many of Beethoven's metronome markings are oddly fast, right?
Hmm.
Um, so you so you have this sort of um, double beat theory, which is that it's referring in a 4/4 piece. It's essentially cut time, so it's referring to the half bar rather than every beat. That's my understanding of it, right? Is that what it is?
Something like that. I'm not sure I completely understand it
And
either.
there's some other kind of division for the 3/4. I'm assuming, or pieces in three. I don't know, to be honest. Maybe it's
Well,
the whole bar.
this is interesting. This is interesting because, again, early editions of the Beethoven sonatas, which are extraordinarily edited, still have metronome markings. Czerny has metronome markings for most, if not all, of Beethoven's works. So is this guy going to come along and tell us that Czerny or Beethoven's own student got it completely wrong?
Right.
Um, that's a little bizarre. Granted, the difference between Beethoven and Czerny in the performance of these pieces, besides different people, was that unfortunately Beethoven could not hear. His instruments were usually abused because he, chopping off the legs of the piano so it's on the floor so he can just feel the vibrations in his chest, for instance, or
Yeah.
snapping strings, tangling hammers, all of this stuff. Does what does that what could that infer or imply, whatever the word is, about his metronome? Was it in the best working condition?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know, but one thing is for sure: to play a passionata at a dotted quarter equals 50 and taking about 20 minutes is who has the patience to sit through that when it's so it just defies almost 200 years of performance tradition. And I'm reluctant to say tradition because it implies that there may not be enough grounding for it. Music tradition and liturgical tradition are sometimes very different things, as you know. But the early sources on performing these pieces tell us certain metronome markings that, for the most part, have remained constant over the last 200 years. And um, I wish people would bring this up more often.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And even, I should say that even Czerny's markings sometimes are a little on the fast side.
Mm-hmm.
But, they were dealing with uh, a Broadwood and an Erard and a Pleyel piano, not the modern Steinway and Bosendorfer.
That's true. It's
The
true.
sounds were very different.
I mean,
I hope that answers your question.
yeah, no, I I guess that's. I'm glad. I knew you'd have a an interesting opinion about it.
Oh,
We
thank
never
you.
talked about this, but I mean, I'd be interested to know if metronomes from that time are still existent. I mean,
Mm.
like if we could actually look at them. My guess is that they're just not precise. I mean, the watch, like I don't know what the standardization on watches and clocks and just mechanical things from the 17 early 1800s are, but my guess is that it's unbelievably crude compared to what we have today. So, I mean, my extremely uninformed opinion would be that metronomes probably varied by manufacturer.
Could
Um,
be. I don't know.
but
It's interesting to note that both Haydn and Mozart composed pieces for like mechanical organ,
huh,
which can be replicated now. And I have heard that the tempi are a little something, but again, this is a little outside of my knowledge,
yeah,
beyond
okay.
my pay
Well,
grade.
now we're just speculating wildly. So, I think I said earlier that the tempi are fast, and then they represent the half bar, which makes zero sense. It would have to be if the tempi is too fast, then double beat would say that two clicks equals a beat. Anyway, whatever. I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about.
No,
So,
neither. I don't know what this stuff involves.
well, it's good we're talking about it and setting it straight.
Yeah.
um, good. Well, I mean, I guess the last thing on my mind is I'd be interested to hear how you're dealing with it. Is that this podcast has been really fun. Don't know what's gonna come of it. I'm gonna keep doing it as long as I want to, and so far it's been absolutely fun to catch up with old friends and people I have met before. Um, and it's just a
James
nice
Kirksey's podcast, pretty hilarious.
shout out to James.
Tell him
Yeah,
hi for me.
I will. I will. Yeah, James is great. Um, now, so I have, this is almost my little quarantine project where, okay, we're all spending more time online. We're trying to create content. So this is what I'm doing. I've noticed in myself a deep struggle musically that has happened with this quarantine because ever since graduating, I've been fortunate to join Quartet San Francisco and to be, kind of performing on a very, thank you, on a very tight gig basis. So we're getting ready for concerts, and if not concerts, a recording or whatever it is, there's always this very urgent need, and then your practice is funneled into this urgent performance that's coming up. And since quarantine, I've had not just I've had not just a lack of motivation, besides the few things
Mm.
QSF has done and the few things I've decided to learn and put up on Instagram, but it's not just that there isn't external motivation. I think more recently, I've been struggling with this feeling that my identity as a musician over the last few years and maybe through school, honestly, I can't remember the last time I wasn't driving my practice towards something. Um, Maybe it's just a problem of self motivation, but I have this weird inability to commit to learning something because it always feels like,
Mm.
well, I'm just this it's like a hobby now. Like what am I getting? What am I preparing for? But as a result, before I move on, let me drill down on that a little bit. I feel like I can't focus on something and learn it in a disciplined way because I don't feel this. I don't feel any drive towards it, but almost like this. It almost feels self-indulgent. Like I'm just gonna learn this because I want to. I haven't
Uh-huh.
ever had to before, so I have this weird uh, observation that my identity as a musician has been sort of consumed with what is functional, what is practical, what do I have to get ready for now? And now, as I have all this free time to actually practice and do something new and different that I want to do, I'm stuck with this thing like, oh my God, like my musical identity has become wrapped up with what I can accomplish and what I can go towards. So I think, um, I saw this really nice post. I don't know. Do you know about Street Symphony?
I maybe I've come across it. I couldn't say.
It's an organization in Los Angeles that, to be frank, I don't understand all of the implications of what it does, but essentially it's a nonprofit that goes towards empowering people on Skid Row, in Los Angeles, so the poorest of the poor, and essentially revitalizing the community there and offering arts and offering classes and education. But the founder of that, Vijay Gupta, shared this thing recently where he's been posting a video of Bach. Beautiful. He plays unbelievably, by the way. You would love it, actually. He plays, I think, with a Baroque bow, A440, but beautifully informed performance. Vijay Gupta.
Writing it down.
And he posted this thing the other day about how, for him, he has this sort of philosophy about practice as like this discipline, like the discipline of submitting yourself to daily practice is a basically a source of joy. Like there's a spiritual element of submitting yourself to something for its own sake that gives you joy. And I was like, huh. Well, I definitely I haven't been thinking about it that way at all, and um, I maybe need more of that. So, how are you doing? Do you struggle with the same thing?
Well, I think the music world right now is deeply yearning for an audience. I, Hillary Santoso and another friend at Michigan. Hillary was a classmate of ours in San Francisco.
Shout out.
Um, yeah, Hillary and I think her name was Alyssa Freeman. I think that's right. Anyway, Hillary and her friend started this online concert series called the 5 p.m. series, which it takes in donations for musicians, each one performing, and then for just musicians at large, just to give them place to a quote place to perform, even if it's a place on the internet. And I played a clavichord recital for them in February. No, sorry, May. Uh, it's very, very fun, even if I couldn't really see my audience. Um, so that, for me, that was something to practice towards. Finishing my piano DMA lecture recital, that was something to practice towards. But largely, I do understand this feeling of why am I playing if no one's going to be listening? And I have felt some guilt about this. But then I was watching an interview of Garrick Olson with the Piano Informational Source blog video channel. It's this wonderful thing called Tone Base. And the interviewer was talking with Garrick Olson, who's a fabulous pianist. He's the only American to have won the Chopin competition in Warsaw, and he currently teaches in San Francisco. Actually, he just started teaching there. And this guy has played it all. He's played everywhere. He's an unbelievable pianist. And he said that, well, since I don't have recitals much, although he's done some online, I have practiced a little less urgently, but I get some time and space to play rap I've been interested in working on, the well-tempered clavier, and I'm thinking, dude, I feel so much better. um, I think the pandemic it has forced us to live on very, very limited means for some time, which is, a great tragedy for the arts. We know it won't last forever. It has happened before. It will likely happen again. Which the onus is on us to show kindness to each other
Man,
and to be
this is
there
the
for each
ult
other in
this
this
is
time.
Sorry, I was just about to interrupt the most heartfelt thing you were gonna say. Sorry, but I mean, I was just gonna say this is ultimate historically informed performance. We have plagues going on. There's wars. People are getting bitten by
Yeah.
dogs.
Yeah.
This is the ultimate six. This is like the ultimate 1700s simulator.
Well, um, neither of us have like 20. There's some of it we're I'm leaving out, but um, uh, at this, yeah. So we're living in difficult times, uh, but if we are willing to submit ourselves to daily practice, there is there is some joy in that. I find just being able to work through something on the piano I've been trying to get my attention to for some time, or I'm practicing on the clavichord because I don't have a harpsichord. I actually don't even have a piano. It's a weighted keyboard I'm borrowing. But fortunately, I've had a private figured bass and continuo student over the summer, and we're doing lessons remotely. But I get so much joy out of sharing music in that, and in the brief licenses I've had over the summer, the limited ones I've had. Um, Listening to music is wonderful. We have so much more time to do it. We can get outdoors and explore nature, go on a 30-mile bike ride like I did this morning in absolutely beautiful wooded area, in southern Ohio, or try new recipes, read Rilke read for the first time in my life, and
Ooh,
had me on
Red
cloud nine.
Red Rilke.
Yes, I've never read Rilke before. It's so beautiful.
Every angel is terrifying. That's what I remember from his Duino elegies. What
I read the
oh
Letters
wait
to a Young Poet.
oh cool. Also, I'm not super familiar with that one. Yeah, read the Duino
Kind
elegies.
of
It's
prepared
amazing.
for my students. I'll write that down too.
Do
So
do I know?
I've been doing pretty well. My wife has a job at Ace Hardware. I have this private student. Um, Gotten a little gig money post facto, so we're doing okay.
Good. Glad to hear it.
It's interesting. She goes and works. I take care of the um, cooking and dishes, and we split some chores, and then I
Awesome.
do the grocery shopping.
Good man.
I'm the stay at home husband right now.
The Hausmann. That's what the Germans say. The Hausmann.
No, I'm the man at the house. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Man, it's been a good talk. I think how long have we been going? Well over an hour. So let's call it
Wow.
good. Let's call it good. This was a pleasure, man. It's been way too long since I've seen you. Um, let me know next time you head out westward.
Are Seeing as you are dating the best friend of our former across the street neighbor from
Yeah.
20 years ago,
Uh-huh.
I'm sure our paths will cross again soon. I need to
Yes.
get myself out there. It's been a long
Yeah.
time.
Yep. Well, wait until it's not like giant power outages and fires. Now is not the best time to be
Plagues.
here.
I mean, what's next? Locusts and hail, and fortunately, we don't have any kids, so no death
Yeah,
of
yeah, that
firstborn.
that one, that plague you can rest easy for now. But I actually think I did hear about some locusts in the news. So, uh, so
Murder hornets.
yeah, murder hornets. So that too. But man, thank you.
My pleasure. It was great talking.
You too. All right, we'll get this out there. We'll get the word on, the, get people educated about some historically informed performance.
Sure.
All right, you have a great
I'll
one.
make sure to put this on my Facebook and Instagram and
Oh,
stuff.
thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Peace. See you later.
Adios.